pensions will be financed. And let me make it clear that we've articulated that for the purpose of the discussion going forward, that obviously existing public officers will not be impacted unless they want to volunteer to augment their pension, because as I said at the very beginning, planning for your pension, planning for retirement, I think has to be taken much more seriously, and therefore in the context of where we are going, my comments here, and I want to make it clear, my comments here relates to how we are going to finance pensions, certainly for new public officers, but certainly I also want to underscore the importance of existing public officers, that throughout this exercise and this discussion that we will have nationally, because this is no longer just about whether it is only about the public sector. It is about how do we get in the minds of Barbadians that planning for your retirement does not start when you hit 60, when you suddenly realize you've put in X amount of time in the public service, and as you know, and I say 60 because 60 is the earliest that you can retire. It does not start when you turn 60. And therefore, about my conversation here about the fiscal impact is designed specifically to ensure that those officers certainly who have served their country, and that the government, by way of how it provisions for your retirement, that we can find the appropriate mechanism whereby persons who may wish to augment their pensions in the future can do so, but certainly with respect to the way that it is administered, and I think at the moment, and I'm sure that Ms. Payne will be able to attest to some of it, what we're talking about as well relates to a lot of the administrative matters that relates to how public officers are effectively treated, by way of trying to ensure that the issues around reverting to your substantive post after serving many years in a different post, that how those can be addressed, and the manner in which we are proposing to do so certainly would allow, through contributions, would be able to abate that, because at the end of the day, one of the very critical things that we are confronted with is that we effectively have a system. It is mostly unfunded, except for the part where the national insurance that we all pay. It is mostly unfunded, and therefore what we are proposing to be able to do is to roll out a series of measures that will allow for every public officer effectively to determine for themselves how they would like to participate in that. Now, I've seen in the press, and I don't know, and I certainly welcome it, I see that the NUPW has launched a pension plan or some type for employees under 40. It is interesting. I've seen it in the, as I said, I don't know what is, I haven't seen the details of it, but I can say to all of you here who in the auditorium and those who are listening, that the government of Barbados intends to resolve this matter to the satisfaction not of all public servants, but certainly to ensure that fiscally that we are in the position to ensure that over time the actual amount of pensions paid directly from the revenue that you collect in any fiscal year, that we're able to reduce that. It does not mean it does not mean that the pensions of any public officer will be reduced or any such thing. The way that it is funded is how we are seeking to ensure that it is done in such a manner that such a over a period of time that what is coming directly from revenue every year reduces, because you've been able to set up a fund that is capable of investment that allows those investments to grow, such that there's a, in the same way that when we make our contributions every month to the national insurance invests those funds, and when you reach your retirement age, the investment income that the fund attracts is able to do that. So there's nothing mysterious about potentially what the government is proposing, particularly with respect to those public officers whose incomes are above the insurable earning ceiling. So it is important for me to make it clear that what we are talking about here does not in any way diminish the value of any public officer's pension. It is how it is financed and paid, such that fiscally, that a lot of, and you're seeing a lot of other reforms with respect to state-owned enterprises and what they do and how they're funded as well, equally taking place. And therefore, without any misinformation going out to the public, I want to give the public officers and the existing, as well as existing pensioners, the absolute assurance that the government of Barbados in no way is seeking to reduce anybody's pension who is already a pensioner, or for those public officers who are in the system already with respect to doing this. The options will be made available for not just new persons into the public service, but to make sure that retirement planning becomes a very critical focal point for all employees in Barbados. But of course, this discussion is taking place in the context of government. So I'll stop there for the minute.
Okay, so thank you very much for those very illuminating opening remarks. And I think in many ways, maybe the key point I want to flag is that the minister is saying that the proposed changes, the pension reform for public officers effectively grandfathers the benefits of current players in the public sector, and any changes impact on new players going forward. And I guess we can elaborate on that. So again, Mrs. Payne, we're going to give you a chance to give your opening remarks in terms of your views on the fiscal, economic, and social implications of pension reform.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I would simply like to start by enlightening persons as to the history of pensions, when it started, why it was started, and why it's filtered all down to this year. It started as early according to the records. The late Mr. Branston Cullimore did some research, and it was discovered that in 1891 there was a scheme called the superannuation scheme, and it was a pension scheme for civil servants. But unfortunately, it was not for the lower brackets. It was just for the upper echelon of the society. The lower workers were worked until they dropped dead or until one of the diseases in the colonies killed them out. And there was nothing for their widows and whatever. There's so much information, but I'm going to highlight the interesting points to cause us to be here at this time. Out of that came the 1925 Act. That started to help the persons in the colony to leave something for their spouses and their children. Then you went on to the teachers. They also gave the teachers a position, 1925 Act for them. And in 1937, also the Public Employees Pensions Act came into being. It went on until it got to the children's aspect of it. You had the widows and orphans. That started in 1928. It was changed 45 years later, and then we had the widows and children. Recently, well, I've been home since 2007, and people were saying, what about common law wives? Have they been given the same status as a wife when it comes to the widows and children? And I was told yes, that they qualify. But the Treasury is the person, that is the department that would deal with that. But I do believe they have considered it. Interesting enough, all 11 parishes at the time were involved in this pension aspect because they paid the churches, the vestries. They paid for health, public assistance, road construction, maintenance, and other services that they helped in the country. So much so that you had the Parochial Employees Pensions Act of 1944. That came out of that vestry system. And of course, In 1959, there were only 3 councils left, and then you ended up with the Local Government Pensions Act. That took care of persons in statutory boards. You had the statutory pensions, you had the casuals, and then you had the appointed persons. We came out then to the 1947 regulations, which was part of the governance of the CAP 25. That was a broader pension act to be more explanatory for things that were happening for public officers. And interesting enough, public officers, one section of the public officers were able to put in 33 in the 3rd years as their maximum service. All others under statutory had to work 40 years. So 40 seemed to be a very significant number. Had to work 40 years in order to have pensionable service, maximum. Then of course you came down to, well, the local government pension regulations was 1961. And then out of that, you ended up with 1966, the National Insurance and Social Security Scheme. Now, I'm just going to give you, because I have a certain amount of time to speak. 1971 was the Casual Employees Pensions Act, and that allowed persons who worked after the 1st of July 1971 who were not eligible for pensions. So there was a cutoff point in most, if not all, of the pensions at that time. 1972, they made other amendments to the National Insurance and Social Security Scheme. In 1975, if you entered the service on or before the 1st of September 1975, you had certain conditions. If you came in after that time, you had a different type of condition. 1978 was when the Widows and Children Pension Act ceased, because if you didn't qualify before then, you could not get it after that date. And then, of course, there was an amendment in 1985 which caused a whole lot of hurrah in the civil service. If you were appointed after the 15th of July 1985 and you had service before 1975, you had to sit down and really look at the law and try to play it with my good friend, Mr. Clark. We had many tete-a-tetes with that. And then you have the age of retirement. Some persons were allowed to retire at age 50, had the condition for 50, then it was 55, and everybody had to go at 60 except the Auditor General, the Director of Public Prosecutions, and a few other persons who could go to 62. Then it came then a time now everybody was at 65, and now it's 67. I'm going to stop there because there's a whole lot more, but that's just a brief history of the dates, the important dates in the pension. And because of these little pieces that you keep putting in the pensions, it makes it very, very complicated. You have the Prime Minister's pension, you have the Governor General pension, you have the legislative pension, you have the judges, you have casual employees, public officers, teachers, all these different sections of the Act. And they can be very complicated and confusing. You have to really understand the laws and be able to apply them.
Okay, thank you very much for that overview. And I think the takeaway there is that pension reform has been with us from the start, which is one of the issues I would like us to probe a little bit, whether there's a case for moving to contributory pensions across the board, something simpler so that you don't have a need for this frequent reform. Clarky, it's your turn.
that there should be no unilateral decision with respect to what we're going to do, what we are not going to do, but there must be that consultative process that is necessary, because no one person has the abundance of knowledge in this whole exercise. And that is my big concern here this evening. And I will state why too, because there is a document I have that says that I should be concerned about the situation, collective bargaining process on behalf of the public servants in Barbados. I wish to say that we regard trade unionists, the benefits of the workers as a total compensation benefit that we give to workers. We got to leave, we get to leave, all the leaves, but it cannot leave no pension as part of that compensatory package. And therefore, it is vital that if they are going to make any adjustment to pension, it be made adjustment to traveling rates, when salaries goes up, or if there is a situation that gas prices or whatnot go up, that we need and we make some adjustment to those things. So we are saying here with the question of pension, let me make it abundantly clear. Personally, I support the idea of a contribution by employees to their pension. I said so in 1988, and eventually Mr. Maloney and myself, we were labeled. But then I looked down the road and I saw what was happening. And I know at some point in time we had to go there, because those persons with two pensions, they were moving out to the public service. And they did not only move out, some of them were dying. And therefore, you had a system where there was only one pension, which is going to be abated on reaching national insurance pensionable age. And that is what worried me. And I saw then, and I said to people, look at annuities. You need them, because by the time you hit 70 if you are alive, you will find yourself dipping close to or even below the poverty levels in this country. And that has been my concern going back to 1998. And therefore, listening to the minister, it seems there's some hope for collective bargaining. Because I have a document here, my possession, that says Pension Subcommittee of the Social Partnership Report, draft 2, March 2019. I have on it the names of the people on the committee. And I see sitting in the audience my buddy, who was supposed to sit on the committee with me. And some of the things in here we never discuss. So like that, I got afraid, because I said, we can't do what we're doing and throw away the collective bargaining process. In 2013, Walter Maloney and then established the CPSA conference. And I was shocked when I learned of Bermuda contributing pension arrangement. So I would want to say the government have a look at Bermuda, because they had that plan in place since 1985. When we in Barbados were going through a similar exercise to what we are going through today, the Abatement administration back in 1984 sought to shift Cap 25 provisions on the Cap 30, on the Cap 384, and we objected strenuously to it, because it was moving them from a position where there were diminution of their benefits. And in trade union language, you don't diminish. What you do, you improve on the benefits that the officers are getting. And we were against it. And today, we still hold the same position that if you're going to do anything, let us sit down and work it out. Because I don't believe in the diminution of a benefit when you can sit down and you can work it through. Now, the whole question of a contributory plan, as I said, I support, and I see the rationale for it, because we look down the road and we see what is happening. But you must sit down. This is something that you cannot do in 2 months. The General Secretary of NUPW must be given the opportunity. In fact, we must see a comprehensive proposal coming from the government as to what they want to do. Would they want the officers to make a 3% or 5% of their salary, salary towards the plan, or what? So therefore, if you're coming, come with a full package so we can look at it and don't give the impression that it's a fait accompli. Because we have the impression that it's a fait accompli. And therefore, there's going to be very little discussion, right? So this document, as I referred to, is here, right? And when I read it, it contains something I never discussed. And that is, we are going to send home 84 people, and therefore we are going to amend the Constitution to give people pension, maturity, give people severance, and then some point in time between 60 and 67, they decide they want to go home, they'll get their pension at maturity, but I will subtract from the majority the severance that I give them, right? I was never part of that when I attended all the meetings. Cedric was never part of it, and he attended meetings, and I can talk to Mr. Cedric, right? Because we never attended those. And that is the thing that worried me, that we are doing things and leaving out the consultative process. I believe if the consultative process is introduced, and I get the impression that it will be, I get that here tonight that it will be, then I have no difficulty with it. Because I said to you, they moved it since 1985, when the administration went back and tinker with the pensionable age and moved that early age from 55 to 60, right? So there are other things in there I will want to mention.
And you'll have a chance to come back in later, Mr. Clark. You'll have a chance.
Yeah, I will come back later, as I said, and deal with it. But I will want to say I feel a lot better right now for the time being. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Clark. And I know Mr. Straw might want to respond, but we'll get him to come back later. Okay, so, Brother Ford?
Thank you, moderator. Professor Robinson, Minister, my fellow panelists. The views I am going to express are not those of NUPW, so I want to get that out front. And I will not comment on the merits or the demerits of government's pension proposals or policies. However, I will comment on the impacts and anticipated outcomes. During the discussions, I shall comment and attempt to enlighten on the following matters and answer questions within the sphere of my competency. I will give support for the need for pension reform, since the current arrangements are simply unsustainable. This fact has been known for over 50 years. I have to deal with the social impacts, the plight of retired workers of the National Assistance Board. I must raise that. There are some anomalies in the legislation existing, and those anomalies should be addressed. There is a notional concept that 20% or 25% of a public officer's salary is not paid, but goes towards his or her retirement benefits. I said notional. And that notion comes because if a person is on a contractual basis in the service, a contract for service, then he gets a 20% gratuity. And if a public officer is seconded to another public service, that receiving public service pays 25% of the officer's existing salary in the public service in order to preserve his pension rights. I am a little bit concerned that we are looking only at public officers. So I will make a little comparison between the various pieces of pension legislation. And I have the legislation here, and Doreen, she spoke a little bit about some of the various pieces of legislation. But there's in my opinion, a need for what is called the Barbados Pensions Ordinance. And this means that it should really look comprehensively at all the persons getting pensions from the Barbados Treasury. There are also some misconceptions about the 33 and the 30 years and the 40 years. And I will try to point out that the 33 years or the 40 years, as is the case with CAPS Rate 4, a lot of people don't get there. Many people retire because of stress on the job and various chronic ailments. The pension of an officer, if you put in 10 years, that actually is 15% of a person's salary. So your pension is really a range between 15% of your pensionable emoluments or half of your pensionable emoluments. So the 33 and the 30 years or the 40 years simply says that you cannot get more than half of your salary or your pensionable emoluments as a pension. I was going to speak about adherence to Section 103 and 104. Mr. Clark raised it in his submission, but Mr. Strong has given the undertaking that will remain. That will not be impacted. Now I want to raise an issue that is a pet peeve of mine for about 9 years. It is the definition of public officer, and it relates to the abolition of office, retrenchment, and pensions. The CCJ ruled in the case of Lincoln Campbell. There was a minority opinion. I believe that minority opinion is correct. And the majority opinion is wrong, because they did not deal with the fundamental issue at hand. Who had the authority to dismiss Mr. Campbell? Was it Parliament? Was it the GG? Or was it the CPO? It was not the CPO, and he did it. It was not Parliament, because Parliament don't hire nor fire. They just abolish posts. And therefore, I think that decision was wrong. In addition to that, the CCJ made a ruling, and that ruling really impacted the retrenchment of workers today. So a lot of workers who now retire or who are retrenched can't get their pensions immediately, because that ruling says you've got to wait till 55. And that is also, I boldly say, as a pension practitioner, an incorrect ruling. So these are things that we have to deal with. I would like to also highlight the need for keeping proper records for pension purposes. Without proper records, you're going to have delays and you're going to have a lot of problems. And finally, there's another issue that I must raise in relation to benefits of officers. The Pensions Act, Cap 25, has a section dealing with mixed service. Mixed service is simply a person working when the British government used to control things before independence. Officers in Barbados work St. Lucia, Trinidad, Africa, the whole Commonwealth. And I know for a fact that I don't know if these officers are still alive, but there are a few officers who had mixed service and whose pension, they don't get their pension on the service outside of Barbados. And I feel the government of Barbados needs to look at that.
Okay, thank you for those very interesting and illuminating opening remarks. We then have the final set of opening comments from Mr. Walter Blackman, and then I will abuse the moderator's privilege and ask a couple of questions and maybe take the discussion in a certain direction. Walter?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Moderator. With respect to pensions, the first question you ask is, why do you need them? What is the reason? First, employers felt that offering a pension plan is an inducement for potential employees to join their organization. So in terms of looking for top talent, that was one of the reasons that you established a pension plan. Another reason for the establishment of pension plan comes from government. Government does not want Barbadian workers to reach retirement and then rely on the welfare system. So government passed legislation to facilitate the emergence of pension plans. Pension is only one dimension of a three-dimensional picture we are looking at. We call it a three-legged stool. You have pension, you have NAS, and you have savings. That's the three-legged stool, and they call it a three-legged stool deliberately, because if you design a three-legged stool and it only has two legs, it's not going to be functional. So you need the three legs. Within the Barbadian context, this is a little difficult because when we look at the wage distribution of Barbadian workers, we find that the majority of them are below the NAS ceiling. So with respect to generating savings, future savings for retirement purposes, that's a long stretch for a lot of Barbadians right now. So for the most part, and being practical, a lot of civil servants will be relying on NAS and government pension. In terms of looking at the types of pensions that we have available, we have government, we have private, and we have NAS. This discussion seems to be focusing on public workers, so we're going to cut out private pensions for the time being. The one thing I would mention about private pensions is that, and pensions in general, anytime you design a pension plan, that is just a promise that you are making to the workers. I promise to do this. I promise to give you this when you reach retirement age. It's just a promise. To go further beyond that promise and make it real, you set up a trust fund. So more in private, most pension plans that you say established as pension plans, you have the pension plan itself, and every pension plan is unique. Heard Doreen talking about judges and whatever, it's unique. So you have to know which pension plan you're dealing with. So after you set up your pension plan, the next step is to set up a trust. That trust there is to receive contributions from the employer and, if applicable, the employees. The money goes into that trust and it is invested and it grows, so that by the time the participant reaches retirement age, you have money in the trust that is there. You have the actuary deciding whether or not the employer has put in too much. The actuary normally recommends to the employer how much they should put in. With respect to the private pension plans, I said we have a trust. With respect to NAS pension plan, we have a trust because all of you might have heard of the NAS fund. So the NAS fund is really the trust for the promises of benefits. And then we have government. Government has no trust fund. So all that the government has done is to make a promise to pay these benefits. The minister said that he's looking at the way these benefits are being financed. Actuarially, the best way to finance pension benefits is not to wait until the pensioner reaches age at retirement. Not to do that. You're supposed to be funding the benefits from early. So that by the time the person reaches retirement, you already have funds there available. Government financing of pension operates on a pay-as-you-go basis. As the minister said, the money comes out of the consolidated fund. So from a practical standpoint, every civil servant who is supposed to receive a pension better keep their eyes on government revenues. If the government doesn't have any money, it cannot pay pensions. That's a basic fact all of us must recognize. So a civil servant who is waiting on government pension and waiting on NS pension, that is a risk. because those two types of pensions have risks associated with them. Recognize that up front. The next thing is, a lot of people get confused about compulsory retirement, and your job. The first thing is that I'm going to say to you is that when you go and you are offered a job, that employment contract, the employer never told you that if when you get 65 he's going to fire you. That reaching age 65 is a reason for firing. He doesn't tell you that. So the point I'm making here is that under the Employment Rights Act of 2012, anytime you terminate an employee based on his age, you're contravening the employee rights. You cannot dismiss an employee on the basis of age alone. The Employment Prevention of Discrimination Act 2020. Age is a ground on which an employee may make a claim of discrimination. So anytime that you're working and somebody said, I'm sending you home because you're 65, you will have to talk to a lawyer. I'm not trained in law, but you should talk to a lawyer. Putting aside that apart now and coming to the pension plan, the retirement age is defined under the pension plan. So in the pension plan might say the retirement age is 65. Sometimes the pension plan may also say that is normal retirement. Early retirement under this plan can start as early as 55, but the benefit will be reduced. Or, in some cases, the pension plan might say it will start at 60. My colleague here mentioned the older civil servants being able to retire early at 55. The law was amended then for later civil servants or people that work in statutory corporations to go to 60, that's the earliest. So these are features of the particular plan. Now, with respect to NS in itself, I just want to give you a quick little background. Social Security came on the scene because the Chancellor of Germany at the time, his name was Otto von Bismarck. He was under a lot of socialist pressure to come with more radical reforms. He didn't want to go so far, so to appease them, he came up with this concept of Social Security, and it was passed in 1889. The United States adopted it in 1935. We adopted it in terms of legislation in 1966. So when I was studying Social Security, natural science and stuff, the first thing I realized is, you know what? The United States has a 30-year lead on Barbados in areas of Social Security. I decided I wanted to be a pensioner. When I decided I wanted to be a pensioner, I told myself, America passed the Employee Retirement Income Security Act, ERISA, in 1974. I said since the United States is ahead of Barbados by 30 years, I would expect us to have pension legislation by 2004. As if by clockwork. 2003, Occupational Pension Benefits Act. We who have been students at KFL, we had to do work twice. Most of the textbooks were written by people from developed countries. We had to sit down, understand their ideas, and then apply them to the Caribbean. The same principle is going to apply here. We should be able to look at America, see the experiences that she has gone through over the 30 years and the extent to which she has learned from those experiences, and make sure then, at least I could try to do it, bridge that 30-year gap. So we do have some problems in the system, and in terms of the solutions, we're going to look at America in some cases, and we will see the solution. I don't want to go any further because I suspect my time is up, but I'll revisit these things and we'll look at the abuses and the solutions to the abuses, and then with respect to reform, look to see what new ground we have to break.
Okay, thank you again for that. So we've had those opening remarks. So we do want now for the remaining session to be as interactive as possible. But I think in the interest of process and so on, I want to give the minister a chance. Is there anything that was said that you would like to respond to from the perspective of government?
Yes, very quickly. And I listened very carefully to the presentations. And I can say to you, Dennis, on this, and I think what Walter just ended on is instructive because you, in your submission, Dennis, you referred to
Thank you.
1998 as a point in time where you recognize with your colleagues that there were some changes to be made. And based on what Walter just ended on, I just want to just go to the gamut because, and I preface my remarks here in this context. In 1998, I was at university when they were doing the Ford Commission on the Republic, and the intention was to take the decision in 2000 to become a republic, and you see what happened. My simple point is, and I think to Walter's credit, we have to take the decisions that we know are in the long-term best interests of the country. And to the extent that we recognize that there are issues, and I say this in all sincerity, the government has been consulting and will continue to consult to make sure we get the fine-tuning correct. The reality is, though, that in a post-COVID environment, the manner in which we accelerate the reforms is going to be much more critical because we were on the path prior to COVID to addressing not just this, but a number of other reforms. So I'm saying from the government's perspective, and you must bear with me, I'm in the Ministry of Finance, so I have to look at the entire picture with respect to the trajectory of the country, the demographics within the context of the country, and therefore the decisions that we make today certainly will have a impact for our grandchildren. And therefore I think on that score, and certainly coming out from the other submissions, there's no single piece of legislation that will solve every problem because I genuinely don't know what will happen in 10 years, 15 years with respect to the profile of the country. And to the extent that we are focused right now on trying to attract persons to come to the country to be able to enhance our skill sets to stop our young people from believing that they have to leave Barbados to become a pensions actuary, which is effectively what Walter suggested, means that we now must make sure that any intervention that we make with respect to reform has to be done in a timely manner because time is money, as we would say, and therefore what we are proposing is not anything that is radical in the context. It is that we've taken, in some instances, too long to take those decisions that ought to have been made in order to successfully address the problem. And I can say to you here, moderator, that this is not a conversation that is for people to use to misinform people. This is genuinely a conversation about how do families in this country are able to support themselves, certainly moving forward. And therefore, with respect to the administration, I know one of the very critical things, and I think you made the point earlier about the way that records are kept. And with the government's push to digitize, because you've been hearing us talking about these things, but it's been happening. Not as quickly in most cases as we would like, but the purpose of ensuring that I know where Walter Maloney worked for all his career, whether he did a secondment to a regional body and what that means for his pension if he went to a state-owned enterprise, for example, for a period of time and came back. All of these are things that, from an administrative perspective, we are working on to make sure that when we reposition the administration of pensions for public officers, that these are issues that can be put behind us because digitally it makes sense for us to be able to have that clear track record of a public officer's employment record so that at any point in time you'll be able to log on to whatever the portal is and see, okay, these numbers make sense to me, I'm ready to go home or I'm going to go a bit longer. But I think the process through which we will go through to get to that point, certainly COVID has delayed that process, but we now recognize that and I say post-COVID in the context of having gone through 2 years of the worst, I think, experience we've all had, that we now must treat this, along with the other reforms, as very, very, very critical and not engage in discussions that will confuse people or deter people, because this will actually be for the long-term best interests of the country. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that. And And I would say that Barbados has an excellent history in terms of pension reform. I always remember when I was NIS chairman and we were having an actuarial review. And our actuary was from the Bahamas, and he spoke in amazement that the most substantial reform since the scheme was set up was done in 2003, in a year where we had an election. And it was not really an election issue. People, the opposition really participated, and it was, so I think we have quite a good history in handling these things in a mature manner. So what I'm going to do now is open up the floor. If there's any questions anyone has, you can approach the mic. Just state your name, and if you're directing a question to a particular person, indicate, or it's a general question. So it's open now for questions from the floor. And are we having questions from the online audience, or is there that facility? Okay, Derek, you're taking the first.
I just want to throw the broad question. And the question of records first is a matter that is really a concern for me personally. I joined the public service in 1972, and there are no records between 1972 and 1983. And I have been struggling to get my own pension started from the public service. But that's not an issue for me.
So right now you are alleging that you joined the public service.
Right, I'm alleging. Yeah. I'm alleging, yeah. But that's not, I can get that started because I can get what's called it, whatever. But the point I wanted to know, we just went through a process of setting up a universal basic wage. Where there's a minimum wage. Right. And outside the contributory pension, why is there any consideration for a universal pension that is a livable pension that all people in Barbados can look forward to, so that even if you have not worked, or if you have worked, that you can expect to get a survivor's an amount that takes you off the street begging. You can call it a pension, a welfare grant. Is there any consideration for a system like that? I'll come back with two other questions, but I want to get that going.
So I see Minister Strawn is prepared to take that one. Yeah, just speak, I think.
There you go. Yes, so it is Barbados already has a myriad of different responses with respect to providing social support. We have been exploring ways to determine how we would provide some measure of what you refer to as a universal basic income. The particular challenge, as will always be the case, and we encourage persons certainly, on the one hand, certainly with the national insurance. The reason for contributing is to make sure that when you get to during your working years, is that when you get to retirement, that there's something there for you. And therefore, whether it is pension, some type of disability, and the basis upon which the state can support persons, I think that rules and principle-based approach has to be paramount with respect to the provision of it, because what you don't want is for people to work and enjoy the fruits of their labor and not put anything into the pot that helps to as we would say, to be able to support persons as they need. So when COVID came, and I use that as an example, and we all know that yes, $600 really is not enough of support to be able to give to persons. But given the circumstances we were operating in, and we looked at the sudden nature of the shift with which certainly everything just came to a screeching halt, we had to respond very quickly to be able to do that. And we went through a process whereby we were looking at households, because obviously you couldn't give it to every individual. So we looked at whether persons in the household were getting, whether they were working, whether they were getting a pension, whether they were getting any support, other support from government, in order to at least allow persons and households to be able to get through that. So the Ministry of People Empowerment, obviously together with the Ministry of Finance, is looking at how, within the context of what is happening within households and the demographics, what is, as you put it, a livable income that a household, certainly, I don't know, of 3 or 4 persons in it, can survive, if you like, on whether being able to cover rent, utilities, and obviously other basic things that would allow them to be able to do so. Now, I can tell you that welfare, certainly over the course of the pandemic, has been doing more and more support as we increase the welfare grants as a means to try to make sure that we can catch people because of COVID-19. But there is some very precise work that has to be done in order to come up with what that looks like, and the criteria for which persons obviously would qualify for that. Family. Oh, well, family in the West Indian context is
Okay, all right. Thanks for that. Do we have anyone else? Okay, we see the young lady here. So again, if you want, just approach the mic there. All right.
Good evening.
This is more in terms of some clarity as well as information, because obviously you would have started by saying this is not a forum where we should be spreading misinformation. All right, I heard you say, well, the Honorable Minister would have stated that. So in saying that, I'm just trying to find out, because basically you're saying there is going to be a system where public officers will be required to make a contribution towards their pension, correct?
Yes.
Good. So in saying this, I know public officers aren't the only persons who receive pension from government. And according to what was stated in the last budget, I could be wrong, I stand to be corrected, all pensions are now supposed to be paid from the National Insurance Unit. So in saying that, this is my question. Since everybody gets pension from National Insurance, is it only the public officers that this proposed reform will apply to, or will this also be taken to private sector? That's the first question. Second question, also simply borders on the contribution of public officers to their pensions, because this is a situation I raised the question about recently. I am a traveling officer in the public service whose travel allowance is placed on their salary and taxed. When the proposal came out from government for the action to be taken, again, I stand to be corrected, but if memory serves me correct, Mr. Walter Maloney at that time was the president of NUPW, and Mr. Dennis Clark was the general secretary. And at that time, it was stated government was planning to tax the travel of traveling officers, and that taxation would then be added to their pension. So if that is what was agreed to, again, I stand to be corrected, but if that is what was agreed to and is being done, because this is years known that our travel is being taxed, am I not already contributing to my pension? Thank you.
Okay, so we have two questions there. You got them both?
I have them both. The second one, I would have to see with precision what you refer to, but that is not my understanding. But I will hold on, just hold on. It is not my understanding, so I will check. I will check, and I will come back to. I will. No, hold on. I will. Sorry, no, come. You come.
When you're checking it, make sure that you check in on all this part too, because recently somebody enlightened me that the only persons that used to receive the same contribution that was deducted from their travel allowance and were supposed to receive it on their pension, I was informed that it would have been I guess I would refer to them as the higher echelon in public service, because this would be like the people that's getting big salaries up in the Z scale and the S scale and thing, them permanent secretaries and thing. That's what I was told. So just check that information for me as well, so that you can lend some clarity to that as well. I mean, since you're checking information, check all for me and verify it.
Okay.
Thanks.
I will check. Just to respond to the first part of your question, all Barbadian employees pay through the contributions through the national insurance on a weekly or monthly basis, depending on their frequency. So everybody contributes to NIS. What you are referring to as it relates to, so right now, as I said at the beginning, we just budgeted just under $300 million for government to pay. In the budget, you would have heard the Prime Minister indicate that the NIS will administer pensions for, after all, the NIS is the largest pension administrator, it is the largest pension fund manager. And with all the issues that I'm sure Ms. Payne can take us through with your records that you refer to and everything that happens, we are going to be, part of the reform is to ensure that between the Auditor General, the Treasury, and PAD, that all of the relevant information is digitized, shared with the NAS, so that NAS can deal with the administration and pay. Now, as it stands at the moment, the Treasury sends to Derek Allen his payment at every month, right? Or any retiree for that matter. In the same way that non-contributory pensions, for example, are paid by the NAS to persons who receive non-contributory pension and the government reimburses. It is just an administrative arrangement that we are putting in place to ensure that there's greater efficiency with respect to the administration, the application certainly of the abatement of pensions and all of that, so that in one place that there is, I think greater confidence, because I think most Barbadians certainly would have confidence in the NAS with respect, notwithstanding a few issues from time to time, but the point is the overall management and the administration of the pension funds, I think most Barbadians have confidence in. So therefore, it is not that, how should I answer? When you ask about NAS paying, it will go through there, but obviously government just reimburses or gives to the NAS given what we have budgeted, they get the monies, and over time, obviously once everything is properly administered and in place, then the investment profile with respect to NAS and other pension schemes, and let me just permit me a minute here to indicate that part of this wider discussion about pension reform relates to how we allow the national insurance to invest in Barbados as well as externally. Because at the end of the day, it is the investment income from your contributions, or any contributions for that matter, right? The investment income that, as Walter said, delivers on that promise of the payment of the pension when you retire. So the reforms being contemplated here for public officers, there will be some benefit obviously for the private sector as well, because the settlement of an appropriate and strategic investment profile of the national insurance as well as other pension funds that that exist in the country, is actually going to, I believe, in the long term, help to bolster pension benefits for all Barbadians. Okay?
Okay,
But
thanks.
I'll follow up on
Yeah,
that.
thanks for that, Minister. I think Walter also wanted to illuminate.
Yes, with respect to the last caller, she was...
Not caller, not caller.
Hold on.
We understand, but
Still have on my moderator cap. With respect to the last person who went to the mic, and they were talking about allowances. As I said before, you have to know and understand what plan you're dealing with. Within the civil service plans, pensionable salary does not include allowances. And she made mention of the fact that she's being taxed on it, and then she's wondering whether that tax is a contribution to her pension plan. Okay, hold on. What it was? But hold on. If it was stated, it was a mistake, because right now we have no civil servants making contributions towards their pension plan. This is a suggestion that is coming for civil servants joining the service in the future. No civil servants make contributions right now to their pension plan. If they tax your allowances, that's a different story. You ought to get that's income tax. Okay, but taxable income is a tax measure, but it does not mean it's not the same as pensionable income. That's the point I'm making. Okay.
okay, thanks for that. We have one question from the online audience. How can I find out if my records are in order before I retire? Anybody want to take that, Walter?
Yeah.
You're going to go first? Anybody else?
Any person here?
No, sorry, so just to repeat the question. How can I find out if my records are in order before I retire?
Right. So any person here working at police or the QEH, especially those two departments, it seems as if they're notorious for not reporting NIS contributions and pay. So those two departments NIS identified. The one way that you can get a record is to check with NIS, because the NIS gives you a printout. Hold on. NIS gives you a printout of the taxable earnings that they have for you, right? So you can check with them, or if you are about to retire, the best thing to do is check with them.
May I say here?
Wait, sorry, so let's get a response from Doreen, and then
The only thing that would help is to confirm what salary you would have been receiving, because your pension is based on your total service and your current salary. PAD is the person, I don't know the fancy name now, but the Personal Administration Division should be our chief record keepers. But the other general department, we have notebook. My former department, we had notebooks from 1914, where the secretary had to record every piece of correspondence, salary, deaths, marriage, births, everything in the civil service. If there's no records at civil service and the audit does not have them, and you have not kept your letters, then you have to get an affidavit done. That's the only way. But I can attest to the fact that the records at PAD were in very bad shape, because all some of the cards had was your name when you first went to work and nothing else. And they would say that they were short-staffed. Then they would call the other general department and ask, because everything passes through there at the Treasury. So it's really at PAD that should have that information. Civil service normally would tell you about the posts that have been created and you were placed in it. But National Insurance is only, confirming what salary you would have been receiving.
Just 1 minute. Hold on, 1 minute, Derek. Just 1 minute. The question did not specifically say public service pension. I thought it was NS. So the answer is, if you're retiring and it's an NIS pension you're concerned about, check with NIS. If you're retiring as a civil service pension you're worried about, check with Personnel Administration Department.
I just wanted to confirm that.
Yes.
1970, somebody from NIS, and it did not relate to public services. They told me they don't look at that.
okay, thanks for that.
We're good.
Okay, so well, let's take Walter's question there.
Thanks, Brother Chair. Before I give the question, though, before you give the my question, the whole idea about keeping records, I know personally a number of persons who would have worked in different departments of the public service, and when they came to retire, the problem that they had was trying to get an affidavit from somebody who almost all the people that they worked with dead already. And so they found themselves in a very precarious situation. So that the records keeping is a good thing. I remember one of the, not going off track here, but one of the recommendations coming from SAGE was that every 5 years, somebody should be given a record statement. Yeah. All right. The main goals of pension and retirement policies, and this is what I got from the European Commission today, states that 1, provide adequate income in old age while ensuring 2, financial sustainability, and 3, maximizing employment. The intensification of population aging over the next 3 to 5 decades will increase the challenges of meeting these 3 objectives. The major is low fertility rates and rising longevity will require adjustment to retirement practices and pension arrangements. We have started to see it happening in Barbados already. Right now, we have a lot of people who have retired and they are almost living on the poverty line. I need to hear from the panel what it is we should be looking at, how we adjust the pension arrangements that we have right now to make certain that persons continue to have a particular pleasant or whatever kind of lifestyle, but one that enhances them and not to make them worse off than when now they've retired. So I'd just like to hear from the panel.
Okay, so Brother Ford wants to get in there, so we're going to let you go first.
What I want to say is this definition of pensionable emoluments, and there seems to be some issue with that. But I can read it straight from the legislation. Pensionable emoluments in respect of service of the Crown in a civil capacity in Barbados includes salary, inducement allowance, and personal allowance, if you're getting a personal allowance. Fees paid from the consolidated fund for services required or authorized by law to be performed by the whole of a pensionable office. The special allowance paid to the officer for the time being designated head of the civil service. Any interim payment made pending a salary revision, and quite recently, traveling was included in that. Okay? So these things are really technical. You can't really guess at them. The legislation is here to tell you exactly what it is and how you can do it. Yeah. So I just wanted to
Okay, thanks for that. So any responses to Walter's question? Dennis, we haven't heard you for a little bit.
Yeah, I think it is a very critical question here to this exercise tonight, because we are looking at what can be done to those individuals when they retire. And I think Brother Ford, earlier o'clock, he started and he mentioned the National Assistant Board. I think that brought the whole scenario together for us to understand what is happening when you retired. And this thing we call abatement steps in. The abatement process is what is hurting the retirees below the middle income bracket in the public service. I'll give you an example. Here it is, a National Assistant Board worker. When the abatement process should have occurred,
It was not done. So she received the pension from National Assistance Board and a pension from National Insurance. And therefore, her income from the two of those put together, she able to juggle with the various payments and everything that she has to do, including even keeping a little medical insurance plan. But when they had to make the abatement, they late last year, here you would have been getting somewhere in the region of about $1,200 or $1,100 from National Insurance. Your pension from government was only $800. You took away the $800 due to abatement purpose. To satisfy the abatement, you removed the $800. And what has happened? She has $1,000 now to but pay electricity, water, gas, rent, and food. And that is the critical thing here that we got to look at any pension reform. I don't think none of the two political parties or the unions look down the road far enough to see that this abatement, when you only can receive one pension, that it is hurting and drawing people down and below the poverty line. So that is a problem. That is something that we got to fully examine. And that is something that worried me. It worried SAGE on a whole, because we had to deal with these ladies who we saw come here to us with walkers, with walking sticks, and that sort of thing. And I could not believe these are people, when I went home almost 8 years ago, that they were up and moving around. But we do not understand what they go through when somebody has to go in Ebenezer and work with a patient, either walk between Keynes or right away around the road to get into Kendall to deal with the second patient, then walk and go around and come down through Cliff to deal with the third patient, then to walk and come down to Church Village to deal with the fourth patient. Mr. Minister, it breaks them up. The two legs can't carry them, and most of them are forced to take early retirement. And for them to get a full pension that would mean a little something to them, they can't get 40 years. They have less than 20, more than 15, but they can't make 40, and that is doing them in. So that is why I welcome the pension reform, because we need to look at this thing we call abatement. It's making a mess of them when you take it out. Or if you were getting a pension that was a clerical office or wherever, and you come to National Insurance, because you come into the service after 75, 1st September 75. So when you come to that, the abatement now carry away what you were planning for, because you didn't know the drop would be so big. So I think we got to look at the whole question of the abatement. That is what really making a mess of pensioners in the public service.
So Minister Strawn wants to come in, and then Walter, in response to Blackman's question.
Yes, thanks very much. Obviously, responding to cost of living, the cost of living impact on pensioners on a fixed income is a global challenge. What we have been looking at in the context of making available more options, let me put it that way, for seniors. And you heard the Prime Minister allude to the fact that we are actually in the process now of looking at how do we introduce the concept of reverse mortgages as an additional tool that may be available to pensioners. As I said, part of where we have to also look at and address is the demographic profile of the country. Now, Walter made a point earlier, and I'm going to dovetail it to this. He made a point earlier about public servants keeping an eye on revenue. And the reason I raised that, because we're here talking about the fiscal impact. And the reality is that the public service has to absolutely understand that what happens in the private economy determines revenue, right? Now, if you have growth, it means that certainly domestically, there's enhanced investment income for any pension scheme, including any that public servants may invest in. It means that the national insurance will then be in a position, obviously, to see greater returns with respect to that. And so, therefore, the simple message that I say on that score is that it's not a single intervention, but public servants in the main, and I think, and I take Brother Clark's intervention very, very seriously, is that how you discharge your duties with respect to the impact that it has in driving growth in the economy will, over the long term, determine how pensions can be augmented, okay, whether by inflation or otherwise, to be able to assure that at least you can keep pace with respect to what's happening with inflation. Outside of people's commitments and the choices that they made, well, I don't, obviously those are things that are at an individual level, but we are looking to see how we can put in place the reforms that would help, as I said, address the demographics, because we don't have enough young people coming to work, producing at the quantum, if you like, that will help to compensate for the fact that, one, we've taken too long to reform a number of things. They're costing. Right now, they're costing too much. So when you refer to records and the length of time that it takes for you to even get a decision with respect to your, that's time and cost. And therefore, when you replicate that across every department in government where it takes, where something should take maybe a week to do, it's taking 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, 2 years to come to a resolution, that's cost. And the reality is that, to Walter's point, I come back again, if public servants recognize that the role that you play every day in determining whether or not some private activity can expand, can export, can drive more revenue back to government, that is part of your role, I believe, as a public servant, in looking after, potentially looking after your own pension interests down the road, because so long as you're able to see, and as I say, it's not every department that has that focus, because obviously you have social departments that obviously don't necessarily impact in the same way. But the delivery of those services can equally help to either bring people back to some measure of good health and the like, as is the case with the QEH and those other institutions. But that is part of where we now have to recognize that the types of interventions that happens in departments every day can help drive economic activity and therefore be able to respond to that. But the investment of pension funds is going to be a critical component to being able to ensure at least there's some. So when you spoke about universal basic income earlier, the same thing with the pensions and the level of pensions. You need a viable investment platform, if you like, that gives the kinds of returns. But I think growth is going to be key.
All right, thanks for that, Minister. Walter, you wanted to get in on this as well?
Yes, when Walter Maloney, when Walter point two, when he mentioned the fact that there's some retirees who won't be living in poverty, I think it might help us if we recognize that with respect to retirees, they're not the same. And I think Mr. Clark made the point. You have a person in the service before September the 1st, 1975. Let us say they're working for $100,000 a year, having 33 and a third years in government. That's going to give them a 2/3 gross government pension. Let's call that $67,000. The NAS, let us say the NAS ceiling is $5,000 right now. Huh? Let us call it $5,000 a month is the NAS ceiling. Multiply that by 12, that's $60,000 a year. You can only get 60% as the maximum, so that's $36,000. So you have the civil servant who was there before September 1st, 75, getting $67,000 from government, and then we see getting 36 from NIS. Call that $103,000, right? The one after 1975, getting 67 minus 36, right? Which is 31,000. So the point that Mr. Clark made is a very important point. If we are talking about reform, we cannot get into reform without attacking this process. And when you look at it, in terms of looking at the correction, you can ask government, you know what, you can tell government, look, this is the case. We recognize that you're an employer, when it comes to providing pension benefits, you said that you already contribute to NAS for the employer, so some credit should be given to you for contributing. All that is fine. If you know originally that you were given 2/3 of a pension, if we assume NAS would take off 1/3, why can't you provide a pension giving everybody 1/3? Because in essence, this government plan could not pass non-discrimination test in the United States. It's called top-heavy, because you recognize there's a great difference in terms of the benefit that a person who is above the ceiling gets versus somebody below. Another fundamental point is that in our private pension, you cannot ask an employee to contribute more than 50% of the benefit. When government comes to the contribution amount, are they sure that that employee will not end up contributing more than 50% of the benefits? So these are things like I think government can just come and say, you know what, our formula is going to be, if we will give you 2/3 before we want to give you 1/3, 1% times 33 1/3 times the salary, and that's done. No mention of NS. In fact, if I had to, in designing private pension plans, I tell employers, do not mention NIS at all. Look, I will design a plan based on what you can afford. You don't have to mention NIS. If you can give people 1%, 2%, so be it. But NIS is going to be a problem, because any problem you get with NIS, most of those private pensions are integrated with NIS. So when they say gross pension minus NIS and there's nothing from NIS, the whole liability is at the pension plan. So these are things we've got to be careful about. Mr. Dennis made the point. We have to tackle abatement, because it's not serving the civil servant who is below the NIS ceiling. It's not serving that person well at all.
So two very important points, I think. One is technical at the level of the abatement. I think the second is something that, in a way, is foremost in my mind as I think about issues in Barbados, in the sense that we have an income problem. We are stuck in a middle income trap, and we are not creating new wealth. And we constantly have a debate about how we slice up the current pie. We can't address these problems until we actually grow the pie, because right now we're slicing the same pie into different pieces. Somebody get a little more and so on, and somebody dissatisfied. The ultimate solution has to be to grow that pie. And unless we grow that pie, it's just it's a kind of Robin Hood economics, you're taking from one to give to the other. See, the big man is on the floor. He's my friend, so I can do that to him.
It's on, yeah. Hi. Good evening, panelists, and good evening, members of the audience. And it's good to see that the NUPW is alive, well, and kicking. Congratulations to Sage and to all of the persons who are responsible for this. As a young man, when I joined this union in the early 80s, I was encouraged by the late brother Rachel Cook to participate in a pensions seminar, which was put on by a gentleman from England. I believe he came here from the British TUC. I was by far the youngest person on that seminar. About that time. But that was an eye-opener for me. And it was an eye-opener because I was among all these wise men and women, and I heard and understood the importance of retirement planning. Just before that, we would have had the 1975 change to the pension plan, and then we had the 1984-85 one. And I start there because I think that one of the important lessons it taught me, and I think that we need to inculcate going forward, it's not too late, is the whole question of retirement planning for individuals. If I look around the room, we only have about 2 or 3 persons here, including you, the minister, who are not of pensionable age as yet. But it is key, and I say it is key because going forward, the support systems in our society, where a person may not have much money, retired, as you know, a lot of our agricultural persons, but the societal system and the support system was there for them. That is breaking down a bit. The other issue, and you alluded to it, Minister, is the whole question of the base to support the pensions of those who will retire. We know that is a demographic issue, but that has to be addressed. And so my question really, you may not necessarily be able to answer it, panelists, directly, but it is, what are we going to do now and in the immediate future to sensitize our population, especially our young people, to the whole question of retirement planning and pensions? In my view, I think it has to be a real public education campaign going forward so that people understand that the state and their employers alone in the society that we are developing are not going to be able or are not gearing themselves to be able to supply them with their income after a certain age. And that if you are to live a full and fruitful life after whatever that age is, that you're going to have money. And so that is an area that I think that we have an opportunity now to sensitize persons to. So the question is, any ideas of how we are going to do that going forward? Thank you.
Okay, thanks for your comments and question. Any members of the panel want to go at that?
Let me think.
Okay, so the
So-
minister is going to go.
Thanks very much for that question. Obviously, it's multifaceted. The government introduced the Financial Literacy Bureau, I think, in late 2020. And that will cover a range of matters which will include retirement planning. As a matter of fact, the Prime Minister, I think in her address in the budget, said to the country that I should not sleep until every public officer understands how important this is for their future and for the countries. I ain't sleep yet. and I thank the NUPW and SAGE for accommodating this discussion this evening, because outside of what the technical discussions and the consultations will generate over time, and I think it is often difficult to get people to focus on something that seems so far away, yeah. And the reality is that with social media and the way that we can do these things and package them, between the Public Affairs Department, we've been working. So there is a subcommittee within the context of the social partnership, which I think can equally be constituted to have the conversations, not just in government, but certainly across the private sector. I think the national insurance itself has been doing a decent job in terms of sensitizing people as they need to contribute. But I think the point you made about the sustained effort collectively in an age of misinformation and disinformation and everything that's out there. And let me tell you something. You see this, whether it's blessing circles or something that people are, people come up with a lot of creative ways to get money from people. I swear to God, I've seen a whole set of things come to me, and I've had to not ignore, had to explain to people why they should not. Now, I can't tell you, I can only advise you what to do. But when you get your money and what you put it in will determine your own circumstance. So there's a lot of misinformation out there, and there's a difference between even a legitimate gambling or gaming opportunity and what these things are, because these things are designed specifically to take your money from you with absolutely nothing hope of getting anything in return. And I say so because this is the environment that we're operating in. People are already strained, especially because of COVID. And therefore, the reason that we need to have conversations not just around pensions, but the whole concept of financial literacy and decision making is so that people don't fall victim to those persons out there who can put together a nice presentation and wow you into putting in some money and telling you to go and get 2 other people to bring money and all these other things that are predicated like that. So I think with the collaboration certainly of the NUPW and others, I think certainly other unions, I think there's an opportunity for us to really start to shape the conversation around retirement planning, but I think generally speaking around financial literacy.
Okay, I know Brother Ford wants to get in on this one as well.
Yeah, well, I believe that the conversation has been centered around what government will do. And I think we've got to move it from what government must do or should do to what the individual must do or should do. As far as the union is concerned, I think I read in the papers recently that the union, that is NUPW, was thinking about establishing a pension plan for its members. And I think that is one way that we should go. That NUPW and all of us shouldn't really be relying on the government for all of our needs. We need to figure out how we ourselves can contribute to satisfying our own needs. And secondly, I think that the union is a willing partner in the social partnership. There's no doubt about it. From 1991, the union has been a willing partner. And therefore, I feel instead of rushing things, even though I know this thing is really 50 years overdue, I think that it is really absolutely necessary that where you have a willing partner, that you should use that willing partner in trying to get some of these things sorted out. So those are my 2 comments.
Okay, thanks for those comments. And, Cedric, you raised, we know in economics, right? We study economics. That's actually one of the most difficult things for humans in terms of long-range planning. It is one of those things you learn almost in the first thing in the economics course. The humans are not very good at that. It's something in our psychology. I guess the most famous economist, Keynes, said, in the long run, we're all dead. So, this sort of long-run planning, it's actually really difficult thing. Who at 21 is thinking about retirement? If we are frank about these things, at 21, you're looking to drink some drinks and chase some girl or whatever, but the idea of what's going to happen when you are 65 and you are making decisions now. If we do a quick poll here, for example, everybody here is sort of savvy. If that NIS didn't come out of your money every month, would you voluntarily put that into an account every month to invest for your retirement? Very few of us would do it. So it's a critical issue, but it's actually a very difficult problem to solve given human nature. And maybe we didn't evolve. If you think of human evolution, living this long to worry about retirement is a relatively recent phenomenon in human history. So I think it's something we need to do, but we need to approach it understanding the difficulty of the task, and that there's no quick fix or easy answer, and you have to go at it in a sustained manner.
Justin, you're very right. Just a quick comment, and Dennis would remember Walter, I believe, and some of us who were around at the time. In 1985, or 1984, when that other change came, and I believe that Doreen would have been an audit at the time, NUPW was front and center in pushing back at that, because it could have been that it would have been applicable to existing public officers. And I always remember that the then Prime Minister said the union can't bargain for people who are not their members or are not in the service. So I'm doing this for people who are coming in for the future.
Okay, so I have 2 online questions. One, and this sounds like a question for you, Brother Folk. I'm the sole wage earner in my family. Is there a provision that would allow my spouse to collect 60, 70, or 80% of my NIS pension if I pass before her? Any takers?
I know that the NIS does have a survivor's benefit, but I don't know the exact amount in terms of the number.
The
But
spouse, for the NIS survivor benefit, the spouse has a choice. The spouse gets the maximum, either 50% of that person's benefit or her own. Right.
If it is greater. If it is greater.
50% of the deceased or
hers,
your own.
If it is greater.
Yeah.
Okay, and then
Huh? No, children get 1/6. Children get 1/6 until age 16 or age 25 if they're going to college. If they're
okay, another question from the online audience. Will the use of 40 years mean increased benefits in pension and gratuity for public officers? That is by retaining the same base of 600, or will the base be changed? And this is a question for Minister Strawn. Minister Strawn, Brother Ford is offering to bat for you on this one.
I got back Mr. Strong on this one.
I don't know why he would want to do that.
No, because I think I mentioned in my opening about this confusion between 40 years and 33 or 30 years. Those two things are what you call maximum pensions. Okay? Maximum pensions. Those are maximum pensions. So whether it is 40 years, the base computation is 1 month over 600, and this is where mathematics could be wrong. 40 over 60 is not the same as 400 over 60, over 600. Because if you take off 1 knot and you take off the next knot, it looks like it is the same in mathematics, but it is not actually the same. Because 40 over 60 is years, and 400 over 600 is 33 and 30 years, which is a difference of 6 and 2/3 years. So that is only a barometer or a maximum. But the computation is 1 month over 600 times your pensionable emoluments equals to your full pension. 3/4 of your full pension, if you are, is your reduced pension. And the quarter that left back times 12.5 is your gratuity. So you see, numbers could be real funny. So the reality of it, 40 years, 33 and 30 years, that's just the maximum you can get. Which I said earlier, your pension could be anywhere from 15% of your salary to 50% of your salary, depending on where you are. Yeah, your salary, depending on your position, how long you work, and those sorts of things like that.
All right, let me simplify this.
Can I take you with me whenever I go out? So we have to work out share of the bill, because I mean, this guy is doing all of this in his head, you know.
Let me simplify the pension formulas for you. The old pension formula is 2%. That was the basic accrual rate, 2%. Because the maximum pension that you can get in Barbados is 66 2/3 of your salary. Since the accrual rate was 2%, to get 66 2/3, that is multiplied by 33 1/3. That is where that 33 1/3 comes from. Once you put in the 33 and the third years, multiply by 2%, you get 66 and 2/3% of your pension, of your pay. Now that the government has changed the formula, now that the government intends, now that the government is proposing to change the formula, what they're doing now is they're saying, after working for 40 years, instead of 33 and a third, after working for 40 years, we want you then to be able to accrue 2/3 of your salary after 40 years. All right? To get the formula to accommodate that, we know that 40 over 60 is 2/3. So what they did is come with a formula 1 over 60 multiplied by your years of service up to 40. So that is how you will get the 2/3. That's that to achieve your 2/3, to achieve pension equals 2/3 of pay now, you have to put in 40 years instead of 33 and a third. That's it.
Let me answer.
So I guess the answer to John Moore's question is no.
No.
Okay, the use of 40 years will not
I
mean,
wanted to just ask
so the answer is no.
And in the 40 years, if you put in 39 years and 11 months, it is only 39 years, so you're actually going to lose 11 months.
That is in the civil service. That is in the civil service formula. They use complete years. That is true.
Okay, so
years.
One more online question, and I come to you. One more. So this is from Angela. Can someone please explain the abatement process and why it would work to the benefit of those at the higher level income and the disadvantage of the persons at the lower income?
I will tackle it.
You go ahead. You tackle it first.
The abatement formula was introduced. The abatement formula was introduced, as Doreen said earlier, as part of a pension reform mechanism. So that in accordance with sections 103 of the Constitution, 103, I think 104, you don't interfere with existing officers unless you give them an option to say whether they want this thing done or not. So you went then to all new officers, all people coming in at the particular point in time when the legislation came in. Because the government pays a portion of your NIS. So the government really don't want to pay full NIS and full civil service pension at the same time. So that abatement was introduced then to reduce your government pension by the amount of your national insurance pension. That's for new officers. It did not touch old officers, officers who were in the system before the legislation came into effect. You see? Right? So that is really the situation with the abatement. My view on the abatement, and I know for sure that there has been the indication that the full abatement also reflects the fact that pensioners across the board, both in the public service and outside the public service, also get a higher taxation allowance when it comes to the fiscal situation, which is, I think, $40,000 for the pension. This is greater than the 25 that would normally be for non-pensioners. Okay, so that will be the whole situation. The problem, as Dennis has raised, is that for lower workers with a lower level income, the abatement can actually wipe out the entire public service pension, and that is what has happened in some cases.
Walter, you want to add to that?
Yes. So with abatement, looking at the government's proposed new formula, an employee having 36 years, working for 36 years, under the government's formula, under the government's proposed formula, they are going to end up with 60% of their pensionable salary. Coincidentally, under NIS, the exact 60%. right? So if we look at a person who is under the NS ceiling, let us say they're working for $30,000 a year, right? So under the government pension, after 36 years, they're going to get 30% of that. So 30% of 30, 18,000, right? 60% of 30,000 is 18,000. Now with NAS, they're going to get the same 60%, but the 30,000, which is 18,000, but the NAS benefit is payable at age 67. So you're going to take this 18,000 and NAS benefit is reduced at the rate of 6% every year. So if you bring it from 67 to 65, that's going to be 12% you're going to reduce by. So when we get 88% of the 18,000, we get 15,840, right? So you can see that that person under the NS ceiling, he's going to get a pension of about, let me see, 2,160, say 2,160 from government, 2,160. All right? Now, and that is per year. That is not much. A person now, when the person asks the question, about the person above the ceiling now, you're working for 100,000. You get 60% from government, gross. That's 100,000. NAS, you're going to get 60% of 60,000 because the NS ceiling is only 5,000, right? 60,000 of that, and that is coming to 36,000 at age 65. That comes down to 31,680 at age 65 because it was 36,000 at age 67, and now that person is going to get 28,320 versus the other one who was under the ceiling that just got 2,000 a year, right? So you can see the difference. And I'm just thinking, that's my position, that government really should be thinking in terms of treating high earners and lower earners alike, because the fundamental concept in pension is that you should not set up a pension plan to favor the highly paid employees, right?
Okay, thank you. And we have the final question of the evening. So we have it from the floor here.
Yeah, good evening. This is a question and a comment. One of the pet peeve of the union is the whole issue of abating invalidity pension. The abatement of playing out the invalidity, and I will tell you this, for a decade or two, some of the same senior public officers were debating that invalidity pension is a national insurance pension. It's not true. The difference with the invalidity pension is that you are deemed to be medically unfit. You cannot work. If you are found working out there, the inspector can report you and stop the pension. You suffer premature retirement because you are invalid. You suffer inconvenience, loss of use, and therefore that is why invalidity was treated separate than national insurance. When you reach the old age, the abatement was applied, and the same rate, because the formula is the same, you get the same monies. It just convert to old age. That is an issue. Now the abatement is being applied, not the invalidity up front. And if you read the section, I can't remember the section, it talks about abatement of national insurance pension. Now I know the argument with the pundits now is that invalidity pension is a national insurance pension, but the two are not parallel. They are not parallel. I think somebody's creating a criminal act right now by putting that interpretation of abating people's pension. In fact, it is so much confusion that when the Prime Minister intervened in 2018, he said, okay, give back the people their monies. You know what happened? They give some, and they said the rest, no, you didn't come at this time, you can't get it. It's a double standard confusion right now being created. Some people now are getting back their pension, and some the abatement remain. I think it comes down to interpretation of the Pension Act. For example, when they say in service at 1975, it just means in service. For the 1985 amendment to come out at 55 at 1985, when it was amended at the 15th of July 1985, they say you had to be appointed. You had to be appointed. It means appointed. So you'll find that from time to time when the public officers in pension asks for legal opinion, one comes in one format and then it changes. And I think this is something that should be tested really with a judicial review, that somebody has committed a crime by putting the abatement to people that earn invalidity pension, which should really be only abated when they reach the old age and NIS. And this is one of the issues that I am encountering. Now, there's an interesting thing in the study, the social partnership of the subcommittee said that only 8% of the people above the ceiling. Now, if that is true, it means that only 92% really going to be within the NA ceiling. So when you apply the abatement, where under that ceiling, the NAS is big, the Treasury is not paying you a pension, they're only paying the gratuity. Because even though I think Brother Walter would have mentioned the 2/3, most people opt for the 50% at 33 1/3, a pension, a reduced pension, and a gratuity. So technically speaking, for 92% at least of the persons, the Crown does not have to pay a pension because the abatement would suit that, because at that lower level, NAS is higher than the Treasury. So if you're dealing with the 8% that above, that is where the Crown is looking at. The only other expense would be that those who before 74 are getting pension and still alive, that is really the expense with double pension. But many public services right now would not qualify. And therefore, I think the analysis has to look at really and truly what is the cause of a pension after the abatement is applied, especially for those above the ceiling, PSAs, other persons, right? That's where it applies. So we are thinking that really and truly, to the extent that this is seen as a burden, is it really a burden, or should it be costed to see what is the real burden to GDP? No. We were told before that when the economy was booming, pension to GDP was very minuscule. It's only because of the contraction program, this what your pension reform is looking to reduce the cost of pension. And we know that it's a gradual process. It's going to 40 years to still get 2/3. I suspect what will happen though with the 40 years, they may use months and convert 40 years to 480 months. This is what they may do very well, instead of keeping the base at, no, not 600, multiply 40 multiplied by 12 is what? 480. So we put the base at 480 and then go to the top so that it's still 2/3, so that it do months instead of completed years. Because if they go to 40 over 60, it's going to be completed years like the boards on the catch rate for. I think we're going to have to put an argument to government that pension, a public servant was seen as a creature of the state, and you protect them in their retirement to live with a level of dignity. You don't want to live in poverty and bankruptcy. The other thing that the government has to look at, that if you reduce the pension in the future, and erode the pension rights, look at NCDs. What is the pressure on the healthcare system? NCDs, you're talking about sweet drinks, and what will happen to a pensioner that can't eat properly? I will bring some sweet drink. I want a little point of sweet drink. I want belly full. To hell with vegetables, I can't afford them. So therefore, what the government is going to do is down the long road appearing to be cutting costs for the pension, because the formula no makes you work longer, 6 and 2 years longer to get the same 33 and a third amount. But then things like poverty, NCDs, and other things going there can create a problem in the social safety net for government. So I think they have to rethink, rather than see pension as a burden on the state, see it as an enhancement to ensure that your elderly persons live in some level of dignity and can live healthy. So that's just my comment towards the pension.
Thank you very much. Okay, I think Walter wants to respond to that, and also Brother Ford here.
No, actually, since everybody took time out to come here tonight, there's one area that I would like to highlight that I want everybody to become sensitive to, and it's a social problem that's being created. We have a situation where you can have a husband and a wife. Husband working for, well, the husband is collecting NAS, $2,400 a month. Wife getting $1,600. They have 2 children, aged 30, 32, unemployed. So the 4 of them are living, $4,000 come to the house. The husband dies. The wife now, since the husband was getting $2,400, the wife now will get the maximum of half of that $2,400, which is only $1,200, or the $1,600 that she was getting before. She just only gets $1,600. Her household income has plummeted from $4,000 a month to $1,600. That's a reduction of 60%. That is far, far too steep. And this is a real problem. It is a real problem in Barbados. So, Mr. Minister, I know how it is, but I mean, there's something that we got to think about.
Okay, well, let's have Mr. Ford and then Walter.
Yeah, this is in response to the to Mr. Warren's comment about the pension and the abatement. I think it is Section 21 of the National Insurance and Social Security Act define benefits, and the invalidity is defined as a benefit, but it's also maybe a periodic payment. When you reach 65, the contributory pension, right. So the actual pension law, I can read it for you all, but the actual pension law says the abatement should be on the national insurance pension. So some legal experts feel that benefit is the same as a pension when it comes to the invalidity. Others, the law is not absolute, so there's always going to be an argument there. The only way that can be settled is if we go to court and the court rules on it.
And when you go to court, you get law, not necessarily a settlement. Okay, so we're gonna break the rules, give Walter one question, and then we have maximum 2-minute closing remarks from our panelists.
Thanks,
So Walter, be brief.
Yeah, very, very brief. Thanks, Brother Chair. First thing, though, contrary to popular belief, there are not many public servants who can plan retirement. There are public servants who are working from month to month, paycheck to paycheck, barely scraping to get the mortgages paid, barely scraping to get the children to school. So it is not a lot of public servants who can sit down here. I don't know how many here can do that, and say we're going to put aside $300 or $200 when the month comes to any pension plan. That's a fact, right? But what I want to talk about, since we are asking persons to work longer, Dennis mentioned it, and it is what we call the Bermudan model. And Dennis did mention, but he did not elaborate on it. The Bermudan model basically is this. After you work in the public service for over 20 years, 20 is the starting basis 20, you have the right then to apply to the government for a proportionate part of your gratuity. Okay? That money is being used for three things really, four. One, for you to purchase or build a house. Two, education. Three, for sickness. And four, because it's Bermuda rents. Because most people in thing rent, right? And I'm saying that is something that I think the union needs to continue to pursue. Because if you're asking me to work longer, then I think I should be asking to get a benefit, one of my benefits early. And the thing about it is that it is so controlled in Bermuda that your check is not given to you to go and buy drinks or do whatever. You must come with the plan. This is what I'm looking at, buying some land. I'm looking to educate my children, and monies will be lent to you out of your whatever you would have accrued over that period of time. That will be lent to you. Of course, you would understand that when it's time for you to retire, it will be reduced by the amount that you would have bought. So I'm saying that this is something that I would implore the union to continue to look at again and to carry it to government. Right? Thanks.
Okay, thanks for that. And Singapore does have that as part of their provident fund, where you can withdraw for two reasons. I think medical and down payment on housing. So we're gonna have the closing remarks. We're gonna start with the ladies first. The lady first. We go to Walter, Brother Ford, and we give the minister the last word. Yeah, Mr. Clark had to leave.
All I want to say is that in putting dates in pensions causes problems. And when you apply that date, it causes more problems. And specifically, I'm talking about the one with appointed after the 15th of July, 1985. I was at the meeting when that was done, and it was never intended for the entire civil service. It was only for nurses and certain persons in the civil, like janitors and those people who had very small pensions before they retire, to allow them to get a decent pension. But it was inadvertently done across the entire civil service, and that has caused problems for everybody. So we need to look at when we put dates in place, and you put criteria for this date, be careful, because then persons too were not allowed to, they were having difficulty if they had broken service to add the first service to the second part. You cannot dismiss some person's first service and throw their conditions of service. It must tie in with everything irrespective of the break.
I didn't get the chance to highlight some of the abuses of the system that we have. Because if you're talking about reform, you must understand some of the abuses. Quickly, I will just run through one. Our severance payment system, that has been abused for a long time. I won't go into details, but the solution is, whereas the national insurance right now pays the severance payment benefits sometimes for employees who refuse to pay, and then seek to get back the monies from the employees, I think they should desist from doing that. Employers should be setting up a severance payment liability fund to fund their severance payments, so by the time the workers leave, they already have a fund set up. That is one. The other problem of abuse we have, sorry to say, is the investment of the NAS fund. The last actual report is at December 31st, 2017, so it does not affect the minister or the Mayor Motley administration. Up to 12/31/17, they highlighted the problems that we have. So the National Insurance Fund had in 5.3 billion. The politicians, not when I say politicians, the ministers, the various ministers of finance use up 74% of that 5.3 billion. It means 3.92 billion has been spent by the politicians. The question is, since the baby boomers have retired and started retiring and retiring every day, where are we going to get this money from to pay them? How is government going to pay back this $3.92 billion that they borrowed? On top of that, the government borrowed our money, and then when we're doing the debt restructuring, they shave off $1.3 billion of the NAS funds. So we do have a serious, serious problem with respect to financing the baby boomers' retirement. And the latest report at 12/31/17, the actual report said, worst, best case scenario, no action being taken, the NAS funds will last up to 2051. But we do have to take remedial action, and I'm telling you now, the system, the NAS system is out of balance, so you can expect contributions to go up and benefits to be cut. And if you carry up the retirement age, that is considered to be a benefit cut. So just alerting you guys, we have reached that stage. We have to look at the NAS and we have to make adjustments there.
Well, I will be very short. I believe that there's a lot of room for pension reform in the public service. However, the pension reform should encompass all the various pieces of legislation and all the beneficiaries of pensions within the public sector. Secondly, some pieces of legislation have benefits for spouses. And I am using the word spouses specifically because I don't see why there should be something called a widow and not a widower. So consideration should be given to the payment of pension to the spouse of a retired person who has died, irrespective of whatever the legislation is. There is an imbalance in the legislation where some pieces of I'm not going to identify legislation, I know them out of my head, but I'm not going to do that. Some pieces of legislation provide for that benefit. It is not provided for in the Pensions Act Cap 25. So I feel that that is a consideration. Now, as far as the reform is concerned, the devil, if he does exist, will be in the details. So we need to really see, in fact, even before a full plan is done, the union should really be involved. If I say the unions, I feel the social partnership should be involved. But since it's about public servants, the private sector cannot speak for public officers. And therefore, I feel that the unions, in whatever construct, whether it's CTUSA, BU, whatever construct, the unions should be involved. And I say again, the unions are willing partners in this exercise. Thank you.
Minister, you have the last.
Let me thank my fellow panelists for what I believe has been a very robust and constructive discussion so far. And I say so far, precisely following on from the point that Brother Ford just raised. No. In terms of no, as it relates to consultation and the continued discourse that has already started. We had a little bit of a hiatus because of COVID, but in moving this process forward, I take the point very clearly that obviously we have to address this matter. We have to address it frontally. It is one that, and I think to Walter's point, obviously it is clear that the debt restructuring had an impact on the national insurance. We've been looking at the recapitalization of the, so just bear in mind, as I said at the very beginning, I'm looking at this whole thing, not, I'm trying to put the puzzle pieces together with respect to being able to make sure that Barbados' stability can be maintained, of which certainly the provision of terms and conditions for public service is a part. But I want to reiterate the point, though, that we should not fear reforms and the changes that are coming. And I think, as Walter pointed out earlier, we can learn from the experiences of others. Now, I don't often like to use the U.S. as an example for social policy for a whole host of reasons, but there are a few elements that I believe from an investment perspective that we need to educate our people about, and certainly the extent to which we can mobilize our own domestic resources now, generally speaking, not just as it relates to pension funds, but to really generate wealth amongst Barbadians. In Barbados and outside of Barbados, I think is a conversation of which retirement planning is a part, and therefore the ability for us to be able to have Barbadians in their golden years, as we would say, live reasonably comfortably, is one that I think that is a critical piece of the puzzle that we can put in place to be able to achieve that. It is not for the faint-hearted, because I can tell you that these last 2 years have been, I think, for all of us, the most traumatic 2 years that we've all ever had. And I think the points that have been raised here this evening, and certainly we should continue the discourse in a much more formal way. But my perspective on where we are fiscally in the context of the COVID notwithstanding is that the economy is still poised really for some tremendous growth. The partnership, certainly with the union and UPW, as well as other unions and other stakeholders, has to be, as we would say, there's been a lot of burden sharing, and therefore we must work every day to generate those outcomes for which we can share that bounty. And therefore, as I see it moving forward, it's not a public sector versus private sector perspective. It is how do we make sure that we leverage the strength of the social partnership so that business of any kind can thrive in Barbados, that workers can go to work and know that their employers will in fact be paying their national insurance, one, and that there is no doubt in your mind as to whether your employer is responsible or not. And regrettably, government is a continuum, but anyhow, government was a part of that prior to us taking office. We had to respond to that. But the point is, we must do right by the workers, whether in the public sector or in the private sector. And I think that once we can have clear rules around compensation, around investment, retirement planning, and as I said, ownership, because mobilizing the resources that we do have, certainly within the credit union system, is going to be a critical part of which the very members of your union pretty much our members within the context, whether it is the Public Workers Credit Union or COB or any of the other credit unions that they're members of, there's a set of assets that we now have to unleash and create the space for wealth generation that I think will help solve some of the social issues that were raised here this evening. But equally, as I said, to be able to make sure then that the returns that we are talking about outside of what NAS may do or what government may do, that those returns actually are credited to persons during their working years, but equally as well in their retirement. So I can see a suite of measures that we are working through in the pipeline to be able to roll out, and therefore our responsibility is to, as I said, look at the entire picture, address the demographic issues that we do have. There was a population commission that was established in 2018. Their preliminary report is in. We have to start to address some issues around immigration and work permits and what we're going to do and all of those types of things, which must be addressed, such that we can attract not just skilled people, but equally investment into the country to work alongside our nationals to be able to help prevent, in a sense, the brain drain that really has accompanied us because of the perceived lack of opportunity. Technology allows us now to, as you've seen with the Welcome Stamp program, people have come here to work, and therefore there's no reason why a Barbadian should feel they have to leave here in order to go overseas, and we lose that investment that we've made. So I'm saying that to say that when it comes to having the broader discussion now about the other reforms, I welcome certainly the union's perspective with respect to being able to respond to that, because some of the answers to the very questions that you've raised here today is going to be reflected, for lack of a better term, in how we are able to deal with some of the other issues which are seriously confronting the country. One of those, very quickly, Mr. Moderator, is that on the current trajectory, the workforce is going to be smaller in 13 years than it is today. And that boggles the mind. So we now have to address that and address that in a very sustained way, which requires certainly serious deliberation and consultation with our people to be able to allow them to appreciate that we do not have the luxury of time to delay. And therefore, the decisions that we have to make, we have to take responsibly as mature persons and institutions. And I look forward certainly to the collaboration of the UPW in helping us to shape the narrative with respect, not only just with respect to pensions, but some of the other critical reforms that will be vital for the future sustainability of Barbados. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. And all that's left for me to do is to thank the NUPW for organizing this excellent forum. You know, the purpose of discussion really is not to see who is right or wrong or who is bright and who is not, but is really to get to solutions. By hearing different views and letting the ideas contend, you really can get what a best case solution. Pension is a very difficult thing. I don't want us to delude ourselves that is something easy. When I sat in the NIS chairman's, in that chair, I said, what have I gotten myself into? Because you manage a business, there's nothing I can do really to increase revenue. These things are by law. This is what the contributions we receive. My expenses that I pay out are legislated. The only thing I have some control over is investments, and you have a small investment space. So pensions are difficult. You have an intergenerational contract. I mean, that's an extremely difficult construct. People have a view that you pay your money into NIS and it's sitting there waiting for you when you retire. But it's actually an intergenerational contract where you who are working now, you pay money in, and that money goes to pay those who are currently retired. And you're working on the contract that when it's your turn to retire, there'll be persons working to pay in to pay you. I mean, that's a very interesting arrangement that we have, but the scheme we have is an intergenerational contract, and these things are difficult to manage. They are continually evolving. I think the good thing for Barbados is that Barbados has always approached this in a mature manner. You have robust discussion, and you've made the right decisions in the past. And we shouldn't despair. It's a challenge, but our NIS is in a better shape than the U.S. Social Security. I mean, surveys in the U.S. consistently show that more people believe that there's life on Mars than they would get a cent out of Social Security. And these surveys are done all the time. We are in a better shape. Within CARICOM, I mean, we used to go around to these NIS Social Security conferences, and if we think we have challenges, I mean, Antigua was a classic case of what you call a real pay-as-you-go scheme. You know, pensions are due today, and the money to pay pensions is hitting the accounts of the NIS to pay out the same day. I mean, we've never gotten there. So I think with all our challenges, I think we have done okay. That's not to rest on the laurels, but really the task is to rise to the challenge. So again, thank you. Good evening. Be safe. Get home safely. We have a vote of thanks.
There's a vote of thanks. All right. I want to express I was going to say give an appreciation on behalf of the membership, because I have been following it online, the participation here tonight. And I want to congratulate the senior advisory group for bringing, again, trying to make this union a fertile place for thinking, for discussion, and obviously for engaging the members in a serious way. Because one thing we have recognized here in the organization, as Brother Warren and I are charged now with leading, is that we need to educate our members a lot more to some of the issues that will affect them. So thanking all of the panelists for participating. I want to thank the media, the multimedia, my friends from Trident 10, who have given able support to our participants on the outside, those persons who have expressed a keen interest and chose to view it online. I want to thank the caterer who has provided some refreshments. Our sister Phyllis outside has sorted that. Thank our Facebook friends as well, our social media friends as well. And thank all who would have participated in some way to making this event a success. And we can only promise you from the Secretariat that we will stand on the solid foundation that you've laid for us tonight, and try to advance the organization some more. And thank you too for agreeing to come again when we have the opportunity to have further discussion. Thank you all.